Well, we made it through 14 verses last week. I think we haven't been that slow since Genesis chapter 1. But we looked at a very important concept on circumcision, which really sort of carries into baptismal regeneration and a number of other false teachings that cults love to try to use the circumcision as a stepping stone into their spurious doctrines that lead men into bondage. And just always a rule of thumb is, when was Abraham declared righteous? You guys remember? Chapter 15, verse 6. Close. And when was circumcision given to Abraham? Last week? Chapter 17. So, very simple. Typically, the cults don't get that right. They say Abraham was circumcised, and then after that was declared righteous. Romans chapter 4 is just repeatedly making that point, that Abraham was not circumcised to add to righteousness, to improve his righteousness, to complete his righteousness, to declare his righteousness. It was simply an act of God. That says in verse 13 here again, he who is born in your house and he who is bought with your money must be circumcised, and my covenant shall be in your flesh for an everlasting covenant. That's it. It's a sign. It's a symbol of the covenant that I made with Abraham. We saw this in Romans 2, verse 28-29. Paul says it perfectly. For he is not a Jew who is one outwardly, nor a circumcision that which is outward in the flesh, but he is a Jew who is one inwardly, and the circumcision is that of the heart, in the spirit, not in the letter, not by the law, whose praise, that's a play on word because that is the word Jew, whose Jewishness is not from men but from God. So he's making it abundantly clear here that it is something that happens in the heart, and the outward circumcision was something to declare that I'm walking in the faith of Abraham as a Jew, not as a Gentile. I'm not going to repeat the study from last week. But moving on here tonight in verse 15, then God said to Abraham, as for Sarai, your wife, you shall not call her Sarai, but Sarah shall be her name. Interesting, with Abraham earlier, they added the H, and so in the Hebrew it's a guttural sound, so it's Abraham and Sarah. And interesting, it's the fifth letter in the alphabet that they added on both, and the number 5 is the number for grace. And for us, it's just God had grace on Abraham. He was probably hated his name for years. The father, the exalted father, he had no kids. The exalted father, he has Ishmael. But now he says, you're going to be Abraham, the father of many nations, even though that had definitely not happened yet. And now Sarah, which is princess. She's going to be called princess. And it says to her, she's going to be a blessed princess. And this princess is going to be given a son. And I'm going to bless this princess. And she'll be a mother, a princess of nations. She's going to be a princess of kings of peoples. Shall be from her. Now, let's not forget, at this time, she's 90 years old now. Abraham, 99 years old. Sarah would live another 27 years. Abraham would live another 75 years. He would actually get married again, we're going to find out later, to a lady named Keturah, and had kids from her as well. So you're not getting older, you're getting better. Definitely true in Abraham's case. But Abraham there fell on his face and laughed. Now, we saw earlier in chapter 17, verse 2 there, when Abraham, God began to speak after 13 years from what we can gather of silence after Ishmael had been born. Ishmael's 13 years old, that God finally spoke again, and he fell on his face there in verse 3, And then now he's falling on his face over laughter. The thought of this 90-year-old lady getting pregnant and having a baby. And he said in his heart, shall a child be born to a man who is 100 years old? And Sarah, you call her by the right name, shall Sarah, who is 90 years old, bear a child? Now, God gives no rebuke here. And so you sort of wonder, well, what was going on in Abraham's mind when he's laughing at what God just said? I mean, laughing so hard he falls on his face. In verse 3, he fell on his face because of the presence of God. El Shaddai was speaking. Now he falls on his face because this is ridiculous. But we happen to know in Romans chapter 4 exactly what was going on in this very moment in Abraham's mind. It tells us in Romans chapter 4, verse 18, who contrary to hope, in hope believed, so that he became the father of many nations according to what was spoken. So shall your descendants be. And not being weak in faith, he did not consider his own body already dead, since he was about 100 years old, and the deadness of Sarah's womb. He did not waver at the promise of God through unbelief, but was strengthened in faith, giving glory to God, being fully convinced that what he had promised he was able to perform. So he wasn't laughing like, this is ridiculous, this is stupid, God, this is nonsensical. He was laughing with joy. He was going, this is wonderful. This is a work of God. Because me and Sarah couldn't have kids. She's 90 years old. Her womb is as good as dead. And this thing happens. It's going to be so outrageously God. That's what he was thinking. He knew that God was going to do exactly what God said he was going to do. And he was just full of joy that what he had promised God way back in chapter 12, that he's now going to perform it. And what an important foundation, as we're going through Genesis, what an important foundation this is of what it means to bear fruit to God by the work of the Spirit, not by the work of the flesh. However, in verse 18, Abraham has a moment. And he said to God, oh, that Ishmael might live before me. You remember in Romans 15, it says, all these things are happening for us, for doctrine for us, whom the ends of the ages come. So let's understand here that Ishmael is a work of the flesh. It wasn't God's plan. It wasn't God's will. It wasn't what God ordained. But he loves his little 13-year-old son. And he's saying, everything I hope to have in a son, Ishmael embodies it. And he's my first and oldest precious son. And I want him to be equally chosen as Isaac. Now, this is an important. Notice what God said to him in verse 19. What? No. Sarah, your wife, shall bear you a son. You shall call his name Isaac, laughter. I will establish my covenant with him for an everlasting covenant, and with his descendants after him. So he makes it just crazy abundantly clear here that Ishmael is a work of the flesh. He cannot be a receiver of the promises of God through Abraham. Now, it's rather complicated, and I've actually taught it a few times in Galatians 4 here, and I have to be honest with you that I still am not sure what Galatians 4 means. It's a very complicated chapter. But the gist of it is very, very clear. And in Galatians chapter 4, verses 21 through 31, He said, tell me, you who desire to be under the law and do not hear the law. For it's written that Abraham had 2 sons, one by the bondwoman and the other by a free woman. He who was of the bondwoman was born how? According to the flesh, or I can say according to the works of the flesh. And he who of the free woman through the promise. Now, just make a note here that in chapter 3 of Galatians, Paul kept driving the point home. Are you guys going to perfect in your flesh what God is doing by the Spirit? They were going back to the law, back to circumcision, back to other religious duties, trying to help God out to be righteous and holy and a better Christian. And Paul is saying, no. The law is what you were freed from. Don't go back into the law to find freedom. There's no freedom there. Don't try to perfect in your flesh what God's doing in the Spirit. And if you would, Abraham is a perfect picture of that. God was trying to get Abraham and Sarah to sit still, to be a worshiper of him. And he's running down to Egypt. He got Lot over here. He's got his dad dying over here. He's got all these things going. And then finally, here now, chapter 17, God finally speaks to him after 13 years after Ishmael is born. And he's like, wow, thank you, Lord. Yes, Abraham, I'm going to say the same thing I've been saying. You're my child. Out of all the people in the world, I'm picking you. I'm picking your lineage. The Jewish people will always be my chosen people to the end of times. Why? Because I'm just choosing you. That's it. No other reason. I'm your God. You're my people. That's it. Now, Sarah is going to have a child, but I'll tell you the hard thing about walking by faith. It takes years. Going through trials, trials would be fine if they lasted 30 seconds. Even if it lasted a day or two, or a week or two, or a month or two, or a year or two. Trials are trying because they go on and on, decade after decade after decade. And you get to that point where there is just nothing left of you, and it's all of faith or you're dead. And that's where God was trying to bring Abraham. Abraham, stop it. Let go. We saw there at the beginning of chapter 17, where he tells him, now just walk before me and be blameless. Just listen to my voice. Follow me. No more Ishmaels. Don't help me out in your flesh. Don't perfect in your flesh anymore. I don't need help. I need you to stop the works of your flesh so I can work the work of my Spirit. So finally, it has to just get crazy ridiculous. Sarah having a baby at 80 would have been ridiculous enough, huh? But 81, 82, 83, now she's 90 or, now it's just insanely ridiculous. It's God or nothing. Isn't that the way it's always got to be with God? We are not saved by our works, it says in Ephesians 2:8-9. It's a gift of God, not of our works, lest we should boast. It's not of, hey, God, don't worry about the kid thing. I got it worked out. Hagar, the girl I picked up from Egypt. Sarah's already given me thumbs up on that. I'm going to go and I'm going to have babies with her. And then we're going to sort of say they're Sarah's because she's a slave in our house. And according to the Chaldeans' laws, this is going to work out great. Nope, there it is. I got a son. Hey, God, take the afternoon off. Me and Sarah got it covered. And God's just silent for 13 years. And God finally comes and says, I've got a work of the Spirit. I've got a work that only God can do. I've got a work of the promise that's based upon me to you. It's not upon you at all. Wow. I'm so happy about Isaac. That's just hilarious. But let Ishmael live before me. Let my works of the flesh be equal to the works of faith. Let the works of my flesh be equal to the works of the Spirit. God will repeatedly say no. Jesus in John 15, we just saw a couple Sunday nights ago. We're going to be back in John 15 this Sunday night. Just amazing stuff. But he says, abide in me. That's it. You don't have to strain. You don't have to stress. You don't have to be all religious and try to be all holy. And pure. I'm not asking that. Just abide in me. That's it. Just rest. No grunting, no groaning, just the branch. If the branch isn't connected to the vine, it gets burned up in the fire. Just let it abide, man. Just let it abide. My Father will prune you. It'll just keep getting better and better in this abiding thing, and you'll bear fruit. But if you take the branch away from the vine, it can't do anything. It can't bear anything. Apart from me, you can do nothing. Now, I just want to say, we've already seen in Genesis that man can do a lot of things. Not only without God, but in rebellion to God. We saw in Genesis 11 where they're building a tower under the heavens, and God said, these people are going to proceed and prosper if I don't go down and do something about it. And he confused them with languages and scattered them because they were going to keep succeeding in a demonic way in rebellion against God. They were building this thing, and the ingenuity of man coming together was brilliant. Abraham and Sarah figuring out this thing through Ishmael. Yeah, man can do stuff. Man can accomplish amazing things. But when it comes to bearing fruit, it can only happen through God's Spirit. Man is spirit. I'm soulish. An atheist can give another atheist a hug and comfort him because we're soulish beings. An atheist psychologist can give another atheist advice and it be right and helpful because we're spirit too. We are physical. You can give a hug. We are soulish. You can hold a hand and truly sorrow or rejoice and the soul of a soul connect. We're spiritual, so we can even dive into that and recognize it. Spirit to spirit. But only the regenerated spirit, where God's Spirit's living in us and it's walking by faith and through the power of God's Spirit, is going to bear fruit unto eternal life. Everything else, it's haywood and stubble. Everything else, it's temporary. Everything else, it's on this human earth level, and it's not going to be bearing fruit unto God for eternity. That can only happen through God. And he is saying here, I'm giving you a promise, Abraham, that's to you and your descendants for how long? Forever. That's got to be a work of God's Spirit. And I can't have any of your flesh as a part of it. So going back to Galatians 4 there, again, he says in verse 23, but he was of the bondwoman as according to the flesh, and he of the free woman through the promise, which things are symbolic. For these are two covenants, one from Mount Sinai, which gives birth to bondage, which is Hagar. For this Hagar is Mount Sinai, Arabia, corresponds to Jerusalem, which now is, in the bondage of her children. So even at that time, Jerusalem was governed by the Romans and by the Gentiles and by the Pharisees. It was just, Jerusalem, it was a bad taste in Christians' mouth because it was a work of the flesh, whether it was Phariseeism or whether it was the power of the flesh of the Roman government. All of its bondage. But there's a Jerusalem from above that is free, which is the mother of us all. There's going to be, one day, everything's going to melt with a fervent heat. There's going to be a new heavens and a new earth and a new Jerusalem. But it is written, he's quoting here out Isaiah 54, rejoice, O barren woman, you do not bear. Break forth and shout, you who do not labor, for the desolate has many more children than she who has a husband. Why is that? How can that be? How can we sit here and say that from Abraham through eternity will have more kids than the Arab people, because those who have the faith in Abraham and are Abraham's kids of faith will be for eternity. Those children of the faith of Abraham were greater than those of the flesh that shall perish. And in verse 28, now we, brethren, as Isaac are the children of promise. But as he who was born according to the flesh then persecuted him who was born according to the Spirit, even as it is now. Nevertheless, what does the scripture say? Cast out the bondwoman and her son. For the son of the bondwoman shall not be heir with the bond or with the son of the free woman. So then, brethren, we are not children of the bondwoman, but of the free. So God is making it clearly evident to Abraham as he would go on throughout the Old Testament and into the New Testament, saying one could not add anything to it by the flesh. Abraham and Sarah, 99-90, it was purely a work of the Spirit. Isaac was a pure work of God. His existence was a miracle. And so through Isaac, this miracle of God, all the descendants would be of Abraham by faith. How are we descendants of Abraham? As a miracle of God. All of us have been born again by a miracle of God. We are evil, hard-hearted, haters of God. Read that list there in Romans 3. There's just nothing in us that would cause us to want to be born again. It's just a pure work of God's Spirit showing us we're sinners and drawing us to himself. And so he goes on here to say back in Genesis 17, verse 19, so no. Ishmael will not share this work of the flesh, shall not be a part of the work of the promise. Sarah, your wife, shall bear a son, and it's through Isaac my covenant will be an everlasting covenant, and his descendants after him. But here's God in his grace. But as for Ishmael, I've heard you. I'm going to answer that prayer. I hear your heart, Abraham. And this is just God in his grace. He turns all things around for good to those who love him, are called according to his purpose, doesn't he? Isaiah, he says, that which the locusts have ate up, I'm going to give back tenfold. You know, Nebuchadnezzar, we looked at Sunday morning, had 7 years of craziness. Then God made his kingdom 10 times greater than it was before. Job was just trashed by the devil. But then at the end of the story, he was more blessed than he had ever been before that demonic attack. This is God. He's always going to make sure that he comes to our aid. As David said, he took me out of the ash heap and placed me as a prince, even the prince of his people. So Ishmael, I have heard you. Behold, I've blessed him and will make him fruitful and multiply him exceedingly. He shall beget 12 princes, and I will make him a great nation. Again, to say we have the lineage from Ishmael very clearly laid out, not so much. From the children of Abraham, right now, there's 18 nations that are 18 Arab nations. And of course, because they're such a tribal people, you could break it down almost infinitely. But that's another story. Anyway, verse 21. And I will make my covenant, I will establish it with Isaac, whom Sarah shall bear to you at this time next year. Then he finished talking with him. God went up from Abraham. So Abraham took Ishmael, his son, all who were born in the house, and all who were bought with him with money, and every male among the men of Abraham's house, and circumcised the flesh of their foreskin, that very same day as God had said to him. I used to say to my kids, slow obedience is no obedience. The only true obedience is immediate obedience. And so again, you know, it's like, hey, pick up your dirty clothes. And all of a sudden there's a shoe thrown against the wall towards the closet, and some stuff thrown over here, and and it's like, that's disobedience. Even though you're sort of half going through the motions, no. It's got to be first a willingness from the heart. So the rod of discipline drives the foolishness from the child. So he's put this nice little padded back in that stings right to the brain and gets their attention. And try it again. Immediate obedience. And he was immediate. We see him just that same day. Now, Abraham was 99 years old when he was circumcised. Ouch! No, that's not in the Bible. That's my personal notes. Sorry. I got to be careful. And he was circumcised at 99 in his flesh and his foreskin. And Ishmael, and his son, was 13 years old when he was circumcised in the flesh of his foreskin that very same day. Makes it akin. Abraham was circumcised, and his son Ishmael, and all the men of his house, born to the house, are bought with money from the foreigner, were circumcised with him. And I just stop and just say, extraordinary. If you can try to get people just to sit down at the front of the sanctuary. It's a pretty hard thing to do. Ask our ushers. Our flesh. Try to get, hundreds. We had 318 armed men go to fight against the Sodom and Gomorrah in a chapter or two ago. So we're talking hundreds of guys. And Abraham's like coming out, I'll go first, guys. The rest of you are next. What? Dude, I'm from Egypt. You're going to stay in this household, you too. And I think there was a lot of guys' knees shaking on the way into that tent, looking at that little flint stone. They didn't have sharp knives back in those days. So I think it's extraordinary obedience. And this is what I think the Bible's saying twice. It was extraordinary. You had a lot of guys in pain, and the next guy went in. You had dozens of guys in pain, and the next dozen guys did it still. You had hundreds of guys bleeding and suffering, and there was hundreds of guys just going, yep, Abraham's heard God, and we're following God as we're following Abraham, and we're doing it, man. And it was an extraordinary, amazing heart of Abraham, shows his leadership, and it shows just really a move of God. Well, in chapter 18, the Lord appeared to him. Now, we saw back in the story of Melchizedek that God appeared to Abraham, but I think of that verse in John chapter 8 where Jesus sort of freaked out the Pharisees in verse 56 and 57 when he says, your father Abraham rejoiced to see my day. He saw it and was glad. And the Jews said to him, you are not yet 50 years old. This tells you how hard Jesus had. He was only 30 at the time. But that's what he appeared to be. You're not yet 50 years old, and you have seen Abraham? So, again, the Lord make it clear. Before Abraham he'd gone to say, I am. And they would pick up stones to stone him. So here we see the Lord, capital L, capital O, capital R, capital D, the tetragrammaton, YHVH, or YHWH. The Lord appeared to him by the terebinth trees of memory as he was sitting in the tent door in the heat of the day. So he's living in this tent. It's just a baking hot day. He's got part of the tent open and trying to get a breeze coming through. This 99-year-old guy sitting there looking out over the horizon. And as he lifted up his eyes, whoa, somebody's coming. He looked, behold, 3 men were standing by him. And when he saw them, he ran from the tent door to meet them and bowed himself to the ground. Now, as we go through the Bible, we have God appearing at different times. We saw him appearing as a high priest, the priest of Salem, the king of God Most High. In chapter 14, we see him wrestling with Jacob. We see him in the midst as a man with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. We see him as a soldier before Joshua. God can do anything. And then the angels throughout the Bible, we see them repeatedly as young men when we see the appearance of an angel. And as a matter of fact, Hebrews tells us when we are talking to strangers and it just seems very extra fruitful, talking to them, wake up. You may be talking to an angel and you're not even aware of it. That's how subtly they are in our midst when God allows them to appear. Now, most of the time, they're in a realm that we don't see. We can't touch, we can't feel. But God can make them appear in the realm that we can see them if he so chooses. So there's 3 of these guys. One's the Lord and a couple of angels with him. And notice this 99-year-old guy, he stands up, and when he saw them, he starts running from the tent door to meet them. And he bowed himself to the ground. So he knows the presence of God now. He senses when it's the Lord meeting him. And he said, "My Lord, if I had now found favor in your sight, do not pass on by your servant. Stop and be with me for a while. Please let a little water be brought and wash your feet and rest yourself under the tree." This is great. This chapter here is really great because remember in the Gospels, Jesus would say stuff like that. Remember he said to the Pharisee, "Simon, Simon, I've been with you now and you didn't wash my feet, but this woman's been washing my feet with her hair and her tears." This is just customary. And here's Abraham saying, let me do this for you. "And I will bring a morsel of bread that you may refresh your hearts. After that, you may pass by, inasmuch you have come to your servant." And they said, "Do as you said." Abraham hurried into the tent to Sarah and said, "Quickly, make ready 3 measures of fine flour, knead it, and make cakes." You know, the thing that we find out about Sarah is that she, as it tells us in 1 Peter, she humbled herself before her husband and called him Lord. And because of this incredible spirit of submission to her husband, it's an example to all of us, not just women, but to all of us. And, you know, I would just like to see some of you guys in your 90s run to your 90-year-old wife saying, "Hey, feast now, Thanksgiving, feast in 2 hours." That's basically what he's saying here. Start making some bread from scratch. Get it all ready. And Abraham ran to the herd, took a tender and good calf, gave it to the young men, and he hastened to prepare it. So he starts cutting its throat, cutting the skin off, getting all the intestines out, getting it all ready, has these guys hand it over to start cooking it. And then in verse 8, he took some butter and some milk and the calf, which he had prepared, and set it before them. So, again, when we look at the Bible, guys, we're looking at a historical account. We're not looking at a myth. This isn't a story about a gingerbread house and, oh, you know, the kids walk, you know. This is like, why is the Bible telling us about cakes and butter and milk and what kind of food? Because it's a historical record. And again, this is also helping us understand the culture. How long would it have taken to fix this food, guys? Hours, huh? And they're sitting there in this great time of fellowship, and they're observing and watching, and it's all going on. But I would like to point out something here, because later in the law, God would say one thing: don't cook the meat in the mother's milk. That's offensive. God's preference. Well, the Jews have taken that and they said, according to their legalistic law, you can't ever have meat with any kind of milk product. So if you go to Israel today, it's always a fun thing if you go on an Israel trip and you say to somebody, "Hey, I got to go to the bathroom, get me a cheeseburger." And they'll go up there to McDonald's, and it ain't going to happen. Not in Israel, because you don't eat meat with cheese. So you go to a mill and they'll have some fish or whatever, but no cheese product, because you can't eat those together. But again, look at here, guys. Abraham is not only putting milk, but butter with meat. And again, what do the Jews say about these kind of passages? God's the one eating it with the angels. So obviously their definition of being kosher is wrong. Well, anyway, notice what he did there. He just stood by them under the tree as they ate. This was custom. You washed their feet. You fixed the food. And then as they ate, you were like a waiter. You didn't eat with them. You made sure that they were completely taken care of. And when they were completely taken care of, you would eat at some point later. Pretty interesting, isn't it? Such a wonderful culture and customs. But then they said to him, "Where is Sarah, your wife?" So he said, she's here in the tent. The tent would be broken off into different sections, and she's in a section over, probably hearing what's going on. But again, for men and women to mix in the same section as a tent, it'd have to be a very unique situation. But he said, "I will certainly return to you according to the time of life, and behold, Sarah, your wife, shall have a son." So it seems to me like, where's Sarah? Oh, she's here in the tent. Okay, I'm going to come back, talking a little bit louder and maybe in the direction where Sarah might be, saying, "I'll be back next year about this time, and hey, Sarah will, she's going to be having a kid." And she was listening in the tent door, which was behind him. And Abraham and Sarah were old, well advanced in age, and Sarah had passed the age of childbearing. Boy, that's generous. And therefore Sarah laughed within herself, saying, "After I have grown old, and shall I pleasure in my Lord being old also?" And the Lord said to Abraham, "Why did Sarah laugh, saying, shall I surely bear a child, since I am old?" Verse 14, make a note of it. "Is anything too hard for the Lord?" Whew, man, it really puts things in perspective, doesn't it? It's amazing how we can just go right on with our world and live like God's weak. Like God's not hearing prayer. That God's word's not the final authority. And that we can live with all our worries and our cares. And I was just talking to Pat before the service because my little sister is got serious cancer right now. And they just found it in another part of her body. It gives her less time to live. And it's something that just changes everything. It's like there's almost nothing really important to me right now. And it's amazing because like everything you're worried and fighting and all these things you're overwhelmed with, and they're so important. I got to get that done. I got to do this. I gotta do that. And then all of a sudden, one of your family members is dying, and it's like, how did those things ever get important? How did I even spend a second worrying about that? And hopefully after you go through that season, you come out and you keep that perspective. You don't lose it. You let this difficult time keep its perspective for you to be a happier and live a healthier life after that. Isn't that a good thing? And this is one of those moments where it's like, Abraham believed God, and he's like, yes, but I still want Ishmael, and Sarah, they get it, they understand it, they got it, but now God is saying it to him again plainly. I'll be back next year, and she will have a baby in her arms. And now all of a sudden, it's a completely different picture. It went from sort of the hypothetical to reality. And reality, it doesn't seem possible. Isn't that the way it is? We can sort of fantasize it, and as long as it's 6 months out, we have all the faith in the world. But when it's tomorrow morning, now all of a sudden, it's a whole different faith, isn't it? And this is where they're at. They're being confronted by God with reality, and they're saying, I don't get it this time. I got it last time. I don't get it this time. And God is saying, look, if I am God, by the sheer definition of me being God, there is nothing hard. Right? If it's one and the same. If there is a God, there's nothing hard for that God. If there is a God, he is eternal. You can't, as they try to have it in various, like Greek mythology and everything, you sort of warm up to the idea of being God, and then you become a God, and then you start living eternally. Can't happen. You've either always been eternal or you're never going to be eternal. But you can't start being eternal. You've either always been all-powerful, or you've never been all-powerful, and you never will be all-powerful. But you can't start being all-powerful. It just cannot be. And so if God is the creator of the heavens and the earth, then by definition, there is nothing hard for him. Jesus teaches us this there in Mark 9:23. Got your notes a little out of order there, but you'll manage. In Mark 9:23, Jesus said to him, if you can believe, what? Say it with me. All things are possible to him who believes. In Luke 1:37, for with God nothing will be what? Impossible. I love these verses because it's both sides of the coin. Sometimes it helps us to think all things are possible, and then sometimes it helps us to say nothing's impossible. It's saying the same exact thing, but it sometimes has a different light on how we view it. In Luke 18:27, he said, the things which are impossible with men are possible with God. Does that need to even be said? But sometimes we've got to hear it. It's like, how can this be? I couldn't even imagine me doing that. You're right. And we don't have to imagine you doing that because God's the one doing it. And it's not hard to imagine him doing that. But sometimes we carry it as if it's all up to us. And then God has to bring us to that place that it can't happen anymore at all. Well, unless God does it. And that's exactly where he'll bring us a lot of times to that 11th hour. In Matthew 19:26, and Jesus looked at them and said, with men this is impossible, but with God all things are possible. There you go. Boy, Abraham, Jesus says it perfectly in Matthew 19:26. And I wonder if Jesus said it to him sort of now. He's talking to Jesus now, isn't he? With a couple of angels. And Jesus is saying this very same thing to Abraham 2,000 years earlier. In Matthew 21, I love this story where Jesus, at the end, before he went to the cross, he's walking by in the morning as he's returning to Jerusalem, and he's hungry. And in Matthew 21, now verse 19, seeing a fig tree by the road, he came to it, found nothing on it but leaves, and said, let no fruit grow on you ever again. Immediately the fig tree was withered away. And when the disciples saw it, they marveled, saying, how did the fig tree wither away so soon? And Jesus answered and said to them, assuredly I say to you, if you have faith and do not doubt, you will not only do what was done to this fig tree, but also if you say to this mountain, be removed and cast into the sea, it will be done. Whatever things you ask in prayer, believing, you will receive. You know, Jesus is sort of crazy when it comes to these concept of prayer, huh? I mean, he really wants us to go big or go home. I mean, it's not us trying to be ridiculous. It's Jesus being ridiculous, right? It wasn't like, hey, Lord, why don't we just say to that mountain, be uprooted? No, come on, back off. Let's just start with little fig trees and maybe a couple gopher holes in the future, but no, this is getting out of hand. That's not what happened. He's the one who said, see that giant mountain? It'd be nothing for God to move that. So believe him for it. I challenge you. Jesus is saying, I'm challenging you. Have faith, believe, pray. Pray huge things. Pray believing in huge things. That's what I'm telling you. I'm God. There's nothing hard. Believe for huge things. Pray for huge things. Pray for impossible things. Pray for things that only God can do. Now we're praying in the realm that Jesus wants us to pray, right? It's an amazing thing when we're refreshed with these thoughts. Well, back in Genesis 18, so he says in verse 14, is anything hard for the Lord? And of course the answer is rhetorically, no. So at that appointed time, I will return to you according to the time of life, and Sarah shall have a son. But Sarah denied it, saying, I did not laugh, but she was afraid. And he said, no, but you did laugh. And then the men arose and looked towards Sodom, and Abraham went with him to send them on the way. So already Isaac was called laughter, and again, because Abraham fell on his face and laughed out of joy and faith, Sarah out of doubt. But either way, when you looked at Abraham, you would remember the hum. He's the father of many nations because God met him and spoke to him, and by faith he received it. Sarah, not Sarai, but Sarah, it's because God said he would do what he said he would do. And every time you see Isaac, you remember that I did the impossible through you. That's looking at these people, just a constant reminder. Nothing's hard for God. God did it of faith. God did it of miraculous. God did it of promise. Isaac's the son of promise. Well, and in verse 16, so these men now arise, and they're looking towards Sodom, and Abraham with them to send them on the way. But they have a conversation here about Sodom and Gomorrah, in particular about Lot. And we're just going to stop right there for tonight, and we will pick up there next week, yeah?